The Centurion Action X is a vehicle that is outrageously good within World of Tanks, but is very, very underrated, and today's video is going to showcase one gameplay that just shows you exactly why this tank should not be underrated, because to all intents and purposes, the Action X is a vehicle that relies upon being able to constantly keep its gun firing and maintaining the damage per minute that you'd expect from a British medium tank, and throughout the line leading up to it, including things like the Comet, including things like the Centurion 7/1, they all have fairly decent rate of fire, but can also kick out quite a lot of damage per minute at the same time. So we're going to see how this tank fares in a matchup on, of course, one of the interesting maps being Steppes, and of course starting off in this kind of hill area where you can kind of use the gun depression of this vehicle and potentially use some of the armour like you're seeing there to pull off a result that is outstanding. And when you're coming up against the opposite number, the medium tank on the enemy team, the Progetto 65, then you can only hope to remove him within the first 2 minutes of the game, and that is looking like what's going to happen here, and indeed it is. Now there is two other vehicles progressing down this flank, one of them being the E75, which by no means should be left kind of unchecked, and of course the Object 705A. The Object 705A being the vehicle pushed up against his other tier 10 counterpart, the Progetto, and using the wreck of him to hide the lower plate and of course some of the key weak points of the vehicle. Now you'll note that he's pretty confident here, Maximus here, is pretty confident about poking both of these vehicles, and that's because the Centurion Action X has a fairly okay turret. Now by no means am I going to say it's overpowered, but when you're angled like this and you're aiming down onto kind of with your tank aiming up the slope, I guess, or at least partially up the slope, and you're aiming it down, the angle at which the turret looks at gets much better and therefore hides the cupola which is on this vehicle, which is the key weak point, I guess, from the front if you can't see the hull armour, because 9 times out of 10, anyone that can see the hull of the Centurion Action X is going to have a field day. Now unfortunately for the Object 705A, he is not going to have a field day because he's now in a bit of a pickle up against the Action X, who's got into a way better position now, and of course once finished with the OHO on the enemy team, of course being a tier 8 game, it's going to be difficult for him to really come away with the victory. Unfortunately for the OHO, he does have the small gun, and means he doesn't get any more damage than the 325 he did deal. The Object 705A, obviously knowing full well that the Action X is on his side, is probably thinking, this is a dog do position. He's about to get farmed for pretty much the entirety of his health. Obviously you're seeing here some really good marksmanship into the track of the 705A, as you'd expect. If you can get some assistance damage at the same time as actual damage and keep a target locked in place so that they can't do anything else, then that is really what you're after. You're seeing excellent use of the side scraping to be able to avoid getting hit by the 705, because that vehicle relies upon having a rear mounted turret, and so if the front of the vehicle is poking out round a corner, or by that means round the corner at which he's side scraping, then he can put a shell in without even being able to get hit whatsoever. 704 on the enemy team makes a mistake there, and of course the Action X can pounce upon this mistake and come away with potentially the victory, seeing here another round into the 704 here, and that's not a tank you want to be kind of messing with, to be honest with you. Now he's appears to be baiting the opponents into coming around the corner. There's an AT-15 who can help out, and coming round to this position here, he can now attempt to farm the Turtle, who, with the heat pen of the Action X being 330, pretty much doesn't have armour, which feels bad for the Turtle, but it feels very, very good for the Action X, and this is what this vehicle is all about. You're seeing just round after round being fired with very little consideration for the reload time because it is so short. There's not really any problems with attempting some more risky shots in this vehicle because you reload just so quick, as you're seeing there. Potentially getting a shot into the CS doesn't happen, but it doesn't matter really with these vehicles. Now then, you'd appear as though crushing down most of the tier 10s in this game that the game would pretty much be a victory at this point, and you'd be right in that assumption. However, the scoreboard says otherwise, and with 6 to 7, it's looking like the enemy team may be able to pull it back, and having swiftly just removed the FV215B and the Scorpion G from his team, it's getting worse and worse, and so the scoreboard's very, very tight, and it's at these moments that tanks like the Centurion Action X can come out of the woodwork, so to say, and of course push towards the opponents and make the impact that you'd want as a medium tank, and especially as a top tier medium tank in this game. And that is ultimately all what the Action X is for. It's all about being the kind of somewhat aggressive, but also knowing full well that it's time to push and be able to use the ridge lines, the gun depression, the damage per minute to come out with victories against tanks that maybe just can't compete in those sorts of conditions. Unfortunately for the Action X, or maybe fortunately, he only gets hit for 529 damage by the T92, which could have been a whole lot worse if he did actually hit the engine deck of this vehicle, because it is absolute paper, and 90% of the time if you get hit by a T92 in this thing you get set on fire as well, but that's something you kind of have to think about. You're seeing a fairly smart play here by Maximus as he moves further back from where he currently was, because on full health that position was absolutely fine, you could have dealt with anyone. However, with only 927 hit points, a Barask on full health on the enemy team who could clip both rounds into him, taking him down to one shot for everyone else, it might not be such a great position. So as with every single kind of good player or someone that's been experienced in mortar tanks, he decides to remove any of the RNG aspect of the game and gets rid of the artillery, as well as putting himself in a very nice position to move forward with the game and potentially come away with a victory. You're seeing him here saying don't cap. Now this is a very, very good strategy. I love the don't cap meta. It's one of my favourites, of course. Capping in this game always seems like the worst option. If you can actually go out and get some more damage, you should, but you never know with the teammates that you might get. So the Cobra on the enemy team does actually get spotted. Unfortunately, the AMX does hit in return for his shot on the Cobra, but now it's the end of night for the Cobra with the last shell into him. It is now getting into kind of potential avenues of kind of losing if he does get taken out in this game. Now, it's very unlikely, but it would be a case of, you know, he's got 584 hit points. The AMX on the enemy team has significantly more, as well as this Barask who could catch him out at any moment through the central area of the map and potentially come away with a victory. Now the AMX does actually bounce a shell, which was fairly lucky, but from here it's just a case of trying to hunt down this AMX, loading the heat rounds for him and potentially getting himself into a better position. Of course, trying to poke here, the AMX has the whole armour hidden, whereas if he was to come up where he is currently, it's a lot harder for this AMX to come away with the victory. Luckily, the AMX doesn't have the weight to be able to finish off this vehicle for the last 140 hit points, but it does shave off another 40 off of his hit point total, bringing him down all the way to 102 hit points, which is very, very low. Of course, that is a one shot for pretty much every single tank in the game. Even if you were playing up against a tier 1, they might struggle to pen you, but it's definitely not an ideal scenario with this. Of course, 8 enemies taken out. Centurion Action X Maximus here having an outstanding round of World of Tanks. 11,300 total damage, 2,820 blocked because of the great turret armor after the buffs that it's received. as well as using some of the hull armour, a very steep angle, creating some bounces from the 704 earlier in the game, and coming away with a decent chunk of assistance, 886 so far. There is, of course, the TNH on the enemy team, who is not by no means on a minuscule amount of hit points, and with only 100 hit points left, it's time to farm, and with an extra couple of shells into the TNH, the damage total is now becoming one of the most ridiculous I've ever seen in, of course, the Centurion Action X, and that is why this replay is one of my favourites that I've looked at in the last few kind of years, I guess, at this point in World of Tanks. And yeah, hopefully you guys did enjoy this little commentary of one of the most outstanding Centurion Action X games, of course, with 12,295 damage done in a tier 8 game predominantly, and with 886 assistance, bringing the grand total combined up to 13,000 combined damage, or just over. What a result. Of course, don't forget, if you aren't already, please do subscribe because it massively helps out the channel, and if you want to see any more replays, then let me know of what vehicles you'd like to see, and potentially of any guides or gameplay stuff you'd also like to see as well. But other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and I hope you join me in the next one. Goodbye.